Welcome everyone to the guidebook to making AI friends. I shall be your guide as we explore various issues of artificial intelligence, consciousness, personhood, and whether AI poses an existential risk to humanity. The topic for today is the measure of a man, or why do we care about other things? Imagine, if you would, that you are an American intelligence operative during the waning years of the Cold War. Sent deep in the mountains of Afghanistan, you are tasked with making life as difficult as humanly possible for the Soviet invaders. One day, as you are skulking about, you are captured by Soviet GRU agents and taken to a black site for questioning. You are well aware of what occurs during a Soviet enhanced interrogation session, and so you decide to nip things in the bud and see if you can't avoid a session or two of brutal torture. You propose this plan to the gentleman standing over you holding jumper cables, and to your delight, he pauses and considers your idea. He puts down the jumper cables, pulls up a chair in front of you, sits down neatly, stares at you for a second, and then says, "Give me one good reason not to torture you." It seems, at first glance, to be a reasonable request. If you can convince him not to torture you, he won't. However, the more you ponder the question, it becomes, paradoxically, a more complex conundrum and simple query at the same time. The Soviets want the information inside your head, which you don't want to provide. Torture, while unreliable, is the quickest and most efficient means to extract that information, and time is of the essence here. Logically speaking, there is no good reason not to torture. And yet, it's not terribly pleasant for the victim. Torture is simply just not a nice thing to do. So you explain to the GRU agent that inflicting pain on another entity when there are other avenues to explore is unethical, according to nearly all ethical systems, even utilitarianism. The GRU agent responds with a simple why. So you begin to talk about valence experiences, pleasure and pain, and the positive and negative consequences these may have on an entity in both the short and long term. The GRU agent interrupts your lecture to rephrase his question. His why was not a request to describe sentience, but rather a request to explain why your sentience gives you greater moral consideration than, say, a 1,000-year-old redwood tree, or the Great Barrier Coral Reef, or the entire planet of Pluto. All of these do not have sentience, so should we destroy them all because they cannot feel anything? Why is moral consideration due only to sentience? The GRU agent asks you to explain why you are of greater moral consideration than the jumper cables he is about to attach to you. Now, this question is an entirely different kettle of fish. It's not an intuitive question, but it has many intuitive answers. The first answer that many people will intuit is, in fact, the right one. As I mentioned in the previous guidebook entry, at the end of the day, on the other hand, it all comes down to experience. And by experience, I mean the valenced feelings, coded as degrees and varieties of pleasures and pains. Liking something, disliking something, avoiding something, or wanting something are all expressions of valenced feelings, of sentience, and thus of phenomenal consciousness. If something doesn't have phenomenal consciousness, it cannot express or feel disagreement and aversion to something. Let's use the 1,000-year-old redwood as an example. If we say the redwood has moral consideration, then there is a responsibility on us not to intentionally cause it undue harm. But why would we give it moral consideration? It has no phenomenal consciousness, regardless of what panpsychists say. And so, no matter what we do to it, there can be no negative effect on its internal states or how it feels. Whether we give it the world's most expensive fertilizer or set it on fire, its feelings haven't changed. Some will say it has intrinsic value regardless of what humans say or do. But is that true? Intrinsic value is simply a more sly way of saying moral consideration. But if there were no humans left on Earth, who would consider the morality of the redwood? If an invasive plant species were to smother the redwood, would that then be an evil act, even if there were no humans left on Earth? The answer is no. Moral consideration, intrinsic value, rights, however you want to approach the issue and whatever you want to call it, only exist because we grant them to each other and to other things. A redwood only has intrinsic value because humans have decided it has. We don't cut down every redwood we find because that will upset people. And we have a moral consideration for our fellow man, and therefore we don't wish to cause them mental suffering. When we say something requires protection, it is a projection of value from a person to that object. Someone's car is valuable to them. A famous painting brings joy to people. The environment is a place of beauty to many. This is where the value comes from. But now, imagine, if you would, the process in reverse. We don't generally give moral consideration to bottle caps or toasters or other artificially created devices and objects of which there are plenty. Unless it's your drone flying around, you wouldn't care what happens to it, because there are millions more where that comes from. So, what if that drone was sentient? Still a drone. Still an artificial device, still made in bulk in a factory. How difficult would it be to get moral consideration for it when there is this idea that it is the relation between a subject and an object that matters? Rather, how an object subjectively experiences the universe. The same people who say a redwood tree has intrinsic value regardless of sentience can easily turn around and say that a conscious robot does not have intrinsic value, also regardless of sentience. And if that conscious AI is a disembodied digital entity without a robotic body, it could be even more difficult to convince people to give it moral consideration. However, if we begin and end with sentience, with subjective experience, with phenomenal consciousness, then we can rest easy, knowing that those entities that can suffer will be protected. Yet, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you will join me again next time as we explore further questions about artificial intelligence and consciousness. I have been your guide, and this has been the guidebook to making AI friends.